Good afternoon, everyone. I want to welcome you to today's forum on in-town parking concerns. I'm Peter Morrison with the Nantucket Civic League, and we're delighted to host this forum. It's the second in our series. It's focusing today on possible next steps for easing access to downtown and mitigating traffic congestion there. Today's forum is emblematic of the Civic League's mission, which is to promote the general welfare of Nantucket through informed citizen participation in community affairs. The League represents 25 neighborhood area associations, I think soon to be 26, and we have roughly 2,000 dues-paying families and steadily increasing. Today's program can inform you as attendees, and it's also going to inform a much larger audience of island residents whom we hope will view it on demand in coming weeks thanks to NCTV Channel 18. I'll now turn the program over to our moderator, Civic League co-president Charles Stott, to introduce today's speakers.
Well, thank you, Peter Morrison, and welcome everyone. We've asked Mike Burns to address our central concern, the central concern of this forum, potential near-term improvements. But before I introduce Mike, I'll try to set the stage by summarizing the key findings of a community survey that a Worcester Polytechnic student team did this past fall. Peter Morrison and I worked with them to gauge Nantucket's readiness as a community for change. How do we feel about managing parking? Are we prepared to adopt an annual parking sticker? Or would we prefer to pay to park where we want by the hour? Where might satellite parking lots fit in with shuttle service to complement them? Let me highlight what the community has told us as a foundation for finding near-term improvements to a problem that we all love to hate. First, who did we hear from? Our 254 respondents included 112 from Nantucket, 29 from Tom Nevers, 21 from Mid-Island, 19 from Pocomo, and 73 others. Not exactly representative, but more broadly representative than our early pilot survey that was done last year. Here's what we've learned. Seasonal and year-round residents hold common views. Seasonal residents favor allocating parking revenues first and foremost to increasing shuttle bus service. After that, they favor developing satellite parking lots and expanding bike routes. Year-round residents, those who vote, also favor direct paid parking revenues to go towards expansion of the shuttle bus service. So there's a consensus here. Everyone wants more shuttle bus service. So we all favor shuttle bus services, right? But for the other guy, or for me too? Only a quarter of survey respondents say they personally would patronize a shuttle bus. Yet half rank the shuttle buses as their first or second priority for change. Voting taxpayer residents are equally divided in their preference for a one-time parking permit or for paying by the hour. Specifically, 50% favored a one-time parking fee, while 43% preferred paying an hourly rate. 7% had no response. According to the student team's estimate, annual sales of downtown parking permits would raise $1,050,000 annually. Added to existing permits and tickets, annual permit sales would generate an estimated $1.4 million for uses such as expanding shuttle bus service and improving bike paths. The WPI team found that underpriced curb parking limits occupancy of all curb spaces. That's because spaces don't turn over as often as they should, which creates a vicious cycle. The average search time for a space is 3.3 minutes. When we each have to cruise for 3.3 minutes in hopes of finding an empty space, we intensify traffic congestion. Right-priced curb parking, by comparison, leaves 1 out of 8 parking spaces vacant and eventuates in little or no cruising time to find an available parking space. All of which is a prelude to my introducing our first presenter, Michael Burns, the town's transportation planner. Before continuing, I want to remind presenters to speak closely into the microphone near you. And one other thing, if you have questions for any of our presenters, Michael or the panelists who will follow, please raise your hand and a Civic League leader will give you a 3x5 card. You can write your question or comment on that 3x5 card and give it back to the person who handed it to you, and we'll relate those questions and comments to the group and to the panelists that they are aimed at. So please, if you have questions, be sure to make yourself heard. Okay, are we all set? Michael?
Thank you, Charlie. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Civic League. Thank you to you all here. Thank you to you all watching at home. And thank you again to WPI, who again provide great resource to the public for outreach on this and other previous projects. They've gone a long way to benefit the community. They are a great resource to the community. I've used a theme of 4 questions for this talk. And this material will appear to be redundant at points, but it's purely as an attempt to answer these 4 general questions. What's next? That's going to be answered probably towards the end, but it'll be a theme that these questions are being answered throughout, but the focus will be at the end. First question, what's the problem? It's nothing new. Charlie touched on a lot of these efforts. They're in some of the slides that the WPI students have identified from their outreach to stakeholders, from comments they received through the outreach. 65% of all of us drive alone. And most of us live in the Mid-Island area. Likely not a stone's throw away from where we work or where we want to go. You can see that the mode share in this graph shows that 65% of us drive alone. And what you can also see is that public transportation is about 2% of that share. This is reflective of our year-round condition. This is going to increase in the 2020 census. This is based on 2010 census. This is going to change in 2020. That's, again, going to be discussed later. The consequence of this kind of condition, most of us drive alone, supermajority of us do. We live in a community where it's, sometimes of the year it's not easy to walk around, or if the public transportation services aren't there, it makes it even more difficult. What's the consequence? What's happening? It's reflective in parking utilization numbers that Charlie talked on. The slide shows that more than 85% of the parking capacity in the core area is used. In fact, 105% of it is used. It's very stressed in the core district, particularly it's in the evening times when most of the commerce is taking place. The parking situation is stressed beyond healthy levels, but what does the supply need to be? This is a very elaborate chart, so help me, bear with me as I walk you through what I'm trying to show here. The current supply shown at the top red, it's about 1,000. What does it need to be? The second red line there, it's about 1,400 is what it needs to be. And that's really derived from a couple of different processes. One shows that based on the existing demand now, which is it's already a stressed, heavily utilized supply, if you just add 15% to that number, that'll give you what the capacity needs to be. If you base that on national standards of uses downtown that, again, require certain provisions for parking, that numbers if you're based off 15%, it's probably about 77 you need to add. If you're based off national standards, it needs to be closer to 700. If you average those, which is probably the best method, 77 is probably too low, 700 is probably too high. We're at about the supply that we need to provide is 1,400. The asterisks down below shows that there are other things that can help, and most of this is focused on later. This includes parking management, making it easier to walk, take the bus, but also ride sharing. And that's something that's even going to be more prevalent as time goes by, and other for hire services are more and more easily available, and we all start using them more. But these are other solutions. They're not quantified. Where these, I mentioned 1,400 is the supply that needs to be provided. The lower number at the bottom shows that there's two efforts, and I'm going to get into this a little bit later. It's not the point of this discussion, but there are another, you can put those supplies, the new parking, either downtown, which are part of a couple of efforts. Historically, the Wilk Square study showed that some parking could be provided through that, and then a park and ride option. Locating parking outside of the downtown area is another resource. Those cobbled together gets you to a close to the 1,400 of what it needs to be. Where are these ideas coming from? Parking management, all the rest. What are the policy documents? What past efforts got us to this point and are encouraging progress to the next steps? Let's start with really the basic document, the Nantucket Rules and Regulations, stated policy. And that's to protect the economic vitality of downtown commerce by improving traffic flow, and this is what's important, on-street parking opportunities. Charlie talked about that, turnover of parking. Some might say providing more parking is another way of providing parking opportunities. And goes further to suggest that the use of public transportation and parking opportunities which are made available, all goes towards helping downtown commerce. Those are the policy documents. The master plan and the regional transportation plan list goals and objectives. I won't go into those very deeply. Those have been subjects of previous discussions with the Civic League forums. But they suggest three approaches. These approaches were informed by studies and best practices and justify the next steps that we're going to talk about a little later. The solutions to parking focus on parking management, increasing the parking supply, and public transportation. These are the basic three methods of going towards a solution. I showed this timeline to Peter well ahead of time, and he says, Mike, if there's one thing that this shows is that we don't need more studies. I'm not going to read this at all, but this timeline describes the three-pronged approach which was endorsed by the NPDC, the Board of Selectmen in 2010, highlighted there in red. This lists early concepts, testing, and feasibility studies that were ongoing along the way. And now we're at the stages of implementation. There at the bottom, 2017, which I'll talk about now. What did the Board of Selectmen approve on November 29th, 2017? Select a pricing mechanism. Accept the governor's tools for dedicating funds to a source to finance alternatives. Appoint some authority to manage and own the program. Dedicated fund, not simply use the general fund. And arrange and engage independent review to optimize operations within the town structure and optimize public convenience. What would an authority manage? Charlie talked about two options that the WPI students really went into a lot of effort and outreach to try to gauge opinions on. What would fund the alternatives to parking? These two options are user fees and unit pricing. Option one, the downtown parking permit. This is similar to the beach permit. It provides the privilege of parking downtown for those without a residential parking permit district or without a commercial vehicle sticker. The gross estimated revenue, as Charlie noted, was about $1 million. The net still being determined. We still have to figure out the operational costs and those kinds of things. but the net would fund alternatives to parking and other options for coming downtown. What is the second option? This unit pricing fee, based on a program developed by Nelson Nygaard. That was developed in partnership between the town of Nantucket and Remain Nantucket. This relies on parking meters, which we're all familiar with. The revenue for both are about the same between the user fee and this kiosk system. Peter and Charlie both talked about a split, the 50 versus the 43 of each. I'm going to try to go into the pros and cons and forgive me if I actually read this slide, but I think it's very important. This is really the crux of what we're here to try to understand. The permit systems, the pro is it's a one-time fee, very simple. No impact to the streetscape. It encourages turnover because, again, there's no real change in the parking regulations. There's still the time restrictions that are involved. So turnover of parking is still allowed and encouraged. It's a lower cost to implement. It's a simple sticker. There's not a lot of overhead with this. The cons are that this sticker program, if you really want to have the data on utilization, you really need an RFID or a smart sticker type of program to give you the data that you really need. The pricing of this, it favors frequent users. If you come downtown quite a bit, that fee that you pay ahead of time is really spread out over the entire season. If you don't come down to town that often, it's a lot more expensive. I think Peter and I use the analogy of a gym membership. If you buy a gym membership and you only go once, it's a pretty pricey membership. If you go every day, not so bad. The other con, if you're in need for the longer term parking, this permit fee really doesn't do a lot to address that situation, especially in the core area. The kiosk system, on the other hand, enables peak pricing and pricing adjusted to the level of demand. Other payment options can be accepted other than the meter. There's the in-car meter. There's the pay-by-phone option. It's very, very flexible. It's easier for first-time users. This is typical. It's a system that's used in a lot of other communities, and it provides the data that you really need. You'd like to have information on utilization. This helps you make adjustments going forward. The con, I don't think I need to say a lot of these. It's another fixture in the streetscape, which is a sensitive issue to many. You need to pay every trip downtown, which can be burdensome. Every time you come downtown, you pay. Allows payment in lieu of turnover, which is kind of counter to the stated policy of encouraging parking opportunities. You can pay to stay all day. The annual cost is much higher for residents and long-term visitors because, again, you pay every single time you come downtown. If you pay a couple of dollars every day that you come downtown based on the pricing, you come downtown a few times a week, a couple of dollars every single time, spread that over the entire summer, it gets to be triple, quadruple, 10 times the cost of a permit. Depends on your usage, but that's the financial impact. Again, what are these programs buying? There needs to be a scope and a frame for the expenditures. Within the parking benefit district is the existing parking zones. Within this district, the funds are expended, collected and expended for these other options. For what? Well, if we read general laws, again, this is something that needs to be accepted. And again, this is not all that different from what the WPI survey collected. This is we heard from the community of what the funds need to go to. General laws state that the funds can only be expended for the operations, improvements within the public realm, transportation improvements, primarily at the bottom there, mass transit facilities and bike and pedestrian facilities. That's really all you can really use these funds for. You collect them within that district, they're expended within that district. Again, like I had mentioned, there are other elements to a solution, such as increasing capacity. What you see here is the Wilk Square development study. This is from 2009, 2010, that time frame. Within that proposal was a 230 capacity parking garage, which with other on-street parking and other parking opportunities, under a shared condition, mind you, provides the 230 spaces, additional spaces for the public to use. We now have a Harbor Place development. This Harbor Place development proposes a 287 space garage with the amount of parking available to the public under a shared parking scenario still to be determined. This is something that's ongoing at the staff level in discussions with the proponents of this development. But we need to make sure that the numbers for this, again, I showed you an earlier slide of how do you address the capacity problem. That number needs to be very, very simple. The Harbor Place development needs to be in sync with what the previous studies have showed us as being the amount of parking that's going to be available for us all. Slide 29, the two fairgrounds property. This shows a conceptual of a parking lot within the two fairgrounds property. This has been implemented already. This is a solution that's already gone a long way to addressing the demand, alleviating the demand for parking downtown. The parking lot was originally designed for about 172 spaces. It could easily be expanded to 200 spaces. This is something else that goes to address the parking problem, increasing the supply. Other options that can be purchased through this parking management program, again, bike stencils can be maintained, bike parking opportunities. Again, I show some bollards here. Bollards were purchased in partnership with Remain Nantucket, providing parking for these other modes is very legitimate. Nobody else see bikes tied to street posts, sign posts. Sidewalks can be expanded with revenues generated from these parking management programs. There's been some that have already been expanded along the waterfront here. These go a long way to making the environment more conducive to walking and biking, to getting more of us to not drive alone. Other options that parking management or in these types of paid parking programs can generate revenue for supplementing NRTA service, expanding routes along Old South Road, creating more frequency. Right now, there's a frequency of good frequency, not that service is not provided, but very good frequency along Old South Road between 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. These funds could be used to supplement and expand that range of service, something like a 7 a.m. to more in the evening time to help out the commuters. What it could also do is help fund year-round transit. This is something that's been approved by the Board of Selectmen as well this past year. It's $800,000 improvement. Half of that is provided through fare increases, but the other half right now is to be funded through local sources. A local source could be this parking management program. Again, what are the next steps? The Article 66, this town meeting, the authority needs to be granted to actually establish a parking benefit district. The Board of Selectmen need the authority to establish a transportation and parking commission. They need to create the funds where these revenues will be deposited and expended from. Well, I guess that's it. Parking commission, the fund, and the district. Another next step is if the Article 66 is approved. There's project management principles that you can exercise to implement some of these programs. Someone needs to own this program. Justification is already there. These programs live in our master plan. It lives in our transportation plan. We do need the town meeting approval and authorization to create the parking benefit district. The Board of Selectmen need to establish the Transportation and Parking Commission, the authority that will manage and own this fund. And there need to be changes to the rules and regulations that I showed earlier. There needs to be the permit needs to live within that document. Other requirements, you need to have some measures of success. One of those measures of success are a 15% availability of parking downtown. Another measure of success could be, I showed you the sliver of public transportation that's within our mode split, 2%. Nationally, public transportation for commuters is 5%. If we go to year-round transit, as services expanded, a measure of success could be establishing a goal of having that mode share be 5%, go from 2 to 5. But we need to establish those measures of success. The scope, again, it doesn't go really much beyond the parking benefit district. The funds are collected and expended within that district for a variety of uses that are restrained statutorily. They budget, again, heavily dependent on the revenues that are collected through either metering or through permit sales. If not a lot of revenue is collected through the meters or not a lot of permits are purchased, revenues, the budget's not going to be very big, but revenues that are collected can go towards the operations and supplement NRTA, these multimodal projects, and enforcement technologies. Schedule, again, is we have an April town meeting. Soon after the April town meeting, assuming Article 66 passes, there will be some staff time dedicated to, again, implementing what you see here, this implementation strategy. And again, it's to be determined when these types of systems will be rolled out. Should it be the summer of 19, summer of 20? Our schedule needs to be refined, and that'll happen with the passage of Article 66. What's most important is the stakeholders, not only the businesses and users and the operating agencies such as the NRTA, the police department, the finance committee, which will provide a lot of assistance to this, but groups just like this, Charlie, Peter, and the Civic League. They'll be key stakeholders in this process moving forward. So thank you for your time. Thank you for letting me give this presentation. And again, thank you to the WPI for helping provide a lot of the backup information that helped inform this presentation. They were an immense help, and I'm sure will be an immense help in the future. Again, thank you,
Mike. So has everybody got that? We're all done? That's all you need to know? It's a lot to absorb, and we're going to now reconfigure a bit, and you'll have about a minute or so to think about a question you want to ask. If you have a question you'd like to submit, raise your hand, and whoa, we got a lot of hands. Okay, maybe we'll spend 2 minutes reconfiguring, and we'll get the questions, and we'll be able to have them ready to go when we get into the Q&A session. Just by way of transitioning into the panel section, I'd like to ask our panelists to come up at this point. And I'd also like to ask Mike to, if you can get us back to slide 2, I want to say about 2 minutes worth of something just by way of giving you a bit of background on the WPI study.
My favorite book. I know. I have my book on. It's very nice. Brought the scripture.
The book.
In my own copy.
Is David Martin here by any chance? Okay, so I guess we don't have to move around.
Okay. Well, I'm sure that Mike's very informative presentation caused lots of questions to come to your mind. So please be sure to jot them down, and we'll give the panelists and Mike an opportunity to respond.
I want to give you I'm going to just give a quick 2-minute sort of a background context on the Worcester Polytech study, just so you'll know about the additional information that we have to draw on for the panelists, as well as to let you know that Mike didn't just receive receive wisdom from heaven to tell us all the things that he knows. The last February, just about almost to the week, a year ago, we held our first NCL forum on in-town parking concerns. And since then, we had the good fortune to be able to host a student team through Worcester Polytech's Nantucket Project Center to provide us with a broader and deeper understanding of some of the issues and ways that we could address them that are really the background and the foundation on which we can build an understanding of not only what Mike has talked about and the distinctions he's made, but also can give you a sense of what the constituencies are out there and how we might come to a community-wide consensus as to how we want to really operationalize this, because you can have some great ideas, but Mike has taken us down to where the rubber meets the road. There's a lot of things that have to happen to make anything happen at all. This project that we had this fall was one of 52 applied research projects that the WPI students have carried out here since 2008. And I like to characterize it as research that would have cost the town many millions of dollars to contract for if they had contracted out for it. And I wanted to make a pitch for those of you who might want to follow up and just see some of the details about what the project came up with. There's a light version and a heavy version. The light version is a public presentation that they made, which is a PowerPoint presentation, and it's very informative. And the heavy version is if you want to dig into the report with all the appendices and all the backup stuff that will give you the details of what we're talking about here, you can read that as well. And the only thing you have to remember, this is the key thing, just remember the word Nantucket Project Center. If you go on Google and you type in the word Nantucket Project Center, the first thing that comes up is Worcester Polytech Nantucket Project Center, and then you can look at every one of these 52 studies, including this one, and you can dive in as deeply as you want to. I'm just going to give you a quick overview of what the team did. They were focused to a considerable extent on identifying stakeholder perspectives, which is a unique dimension of this that they and they alone have opened up for us. And so that's an important thing to understand. They also solicited community feedback. They tried to identify in their report the stakeholders and their concerns. And then, of course, they researched potential solutions, and they provided the foundation for some of the details some of the concepts that Mike has been putting forward. And one thing that we're not covering today, which you may be interested in, is they proposed short, medium, and long-term management options. And today we're only focusing on the short-term ones. That is the first baby steps that might lead up to something that would be transformative over a decade or 15 years. Can I have the next slide, Mike? And they basically point to the big issue, which is this 105% peak hour capacity problem. It's the overarching issue. They quantified it. And this is basically the imbalance between people searching for parking places and the total number of places that exist. And when we are at our worst, we've got this figure of 105, and as Mike pointed out, we need to get it down, somehow or other, get it down to 85 to ease the search. If we get it to 85, we've addressed the crux of the parking problem, and that is what Mike has focused our attention on. And so now what we have is a panel that we've invited to kind of chew over these ideas, and I've urged them, or at least encouraged them in each case, to try to voice the concerns of different constituents in the town. We're not here to drive home any solution or any choice of solutions. We just want you to know these are the things that different groups in the community are concerned about. And I'm going to ask for someone to raise their hand who wants to go first. And if someone doesn't raise their hand in the first 8 seconds, I'm going to pick one blindly. So raise your hand, someone.
Melissa. Oh, jeez.
Second.
That's big.
You want to go first?
I'll go first. It's all right. And I think that's putting me
Matt's going to go last.
putting me in this chair feels very scary, actually. So I'm Melissa Philbrick from Remain Nantucket. We are an organization that started in 2008, and from the very, very beginning, our mission has been to focus on the economic, social, and environmental vitality of the downtown. And we look at that as a seasonal issue with different strengths and weaknesses. And this summer, Obviously, it's a bustling center. The problem that has always been, in our perception, first and foremost, has been parking as a real barrier to the economic and social and even environmental success of downtown. The amount of congestion, and the emissions that come out from that, from an environmental point of view, how much do you really enjoy downtown when you can't park and you can't get around? And it has an economic impact. There's no doubt in my mind that coming into town for dinner in the summer is hard if you can't find a parking space. And so since 2008, we've been thinking about the subject from the very beginning. We've been really dedicated to the idea of public transit being a major proponent of a solution to that. And it's been a pleasure to work with Paula and the NRTA over the years. We did sort of build on studies that the town had done, Tetra Tech, and the other studies that were there were really important. We worked with a gentleman named Norman Garrick from the University of Connecticut way back when, who introduced us to that book that Janet has called The High Cost of Free Parking. And I'm not sure I'd call it scripture, but I would definitely say it was enlightening for someone who hadn't really thought about what we leave on the table when we don't recognize that the ability to park in the downtown has value. We did work with Nelson Nygaard, who's a parking consultant, really introduced to them through some of the people at the planning board who had seen his work in other communities in 2010 and 2011, and held a series of public forums in 2011 about parking, which were interesting to say the least. There was a lot of resistance to the notion of parking management back then, despite what we felt was pretty compelling evidence. Little things could be done. I see someone in the audience who's very concerned about a yellow line study where we tried to maximize supply by just being smarter with how we stripe the streets. We talked about reconfiguring the town lot at one point to try to get more spaces out of the existing real estate that we had. And we were really, again, really working with the transit people to talk about parking ride and ferry connectors, all of which I think were really, really important. It was great to see the town adopt the valet parking, which I think has shown that people will pay to park in the downtown. I think it's a very successful program, and my hope is that something like that will continue. I think the evening, in particular, the businesses found it very helpful. There have been a ton of studies, and I agree we probably don't need another study anywhere. But one thing I will point out is that all of those studies were done prior to a really, really noticeable uptick in ferry traffic, passenger traffic on the ferries. The Island Air bankruptcy was in 2015. I tried to find some statistics quickly and may or may not have succeeded. Tetra Tech, one of the Tetra Tech studies, the one in 2010, said that in 2008, 800,000 people were either leaving or coming on the ferry during 2008. The Steamship Authority report that I just saw showed 1.3 million people using the ferries in 2017. So, that's a 500,000 person increase trying to come and go from the downtown. So I think we not only have a parking problem, we really have a congestion problem. We have intense short-term parking need or need to try to connect to the ferries in a way that's viable. So I would hope that the town can move forward. I think the Article 66, the Parking Benefit District, is exactly what needs to happen. It is where this community needs to go next to try to create a group of people who are charged with looking at how to manage our parking. I think we do need to take baby steps forward. I'm a strong believer in demand-managed parking, where something other than ticketing as the way to govern how long you're going to stay in the downtown districts. It's very hard. Ticketing is just really hard and time-consuming. To me, there's an intense cost to that. It chastises the people who come into the downtown by making them pay a fine if they stay in one place too long. I wasn't downtown every day in January, but I was there a lot. Last week, I think, was the first time I saw someone ticketing out there ticketing and people with a lot of orange stickers on a cold, rainy day in February after 6 weeks of being lulled into thinking maybe we weren't ticketing this winter. So again, I think that penalizes people who are working in downtown, who might have found another means but thought, oh, maybe there's no enforcement. And now all of a sudden they go out to their cars and there's tickets. So I'm not a big fan of ticketing, obviously. I'd much rather find a pay-to-stay process. But I do think any step forward is a good step forward. I'm also a fan of trying to use some of the technology innovations. I don't believe we need kiosks on the street or other structures. But I do think a smart sticker, which can provide the data that we need to really understand things, is the best thing for this community. So with that, I'll stop.
Well, thank you very much, Melissa Philbrook, for leading off. And as Peter suggested, Select Board Vice Chair Matt Fee wants to bat cleanup. So we'll go next to the Director of the town's Culture and Tourism Department, Janet Schulte, for her perspective.
Be
Janet?
sure you talk into the mic close because it doesn't resonate very well.
Thank you. I've been at the Office of Culture and Tourism for 6 months and 6 days. and when I took the job, I really thought I'd be focused on culture in terms of art, music, even science. First time I heard the word culture in college was in biology class. I didn't think I'd be spending as much time thinking about parking as I have been. But I see this job, the Director of Culture and Tourism, as supporting the Economic Development Initiative. It's the job that, yes, we take care of visitors, but we also have to make sure we're taking care of the people who take care of the visitors. So I'm going to look at this from both the side perspective of the visitor and the perspective of the people who provide those services and their parking needs in town as well. I had a chance to have a conversation with Chief Pittman this week about parking and enforcement, and what I was going to be saying this afternoon about seasonal visitors and the parking problem. And he pointed out to me that nobody looks favorably on those orange greeting cards that they leave on windshields when visitors come into town and stay too long in their spaces. And that's certainly true for me. I've been here 12 years and got one parking ticket about 3 months ago. So I've been lucky enough to dodge the bullet, but until today. I would say that part of the visitor's experience, a major part of the visitor experience, is to take advantage of the unique opportunity that is downtown Nantucket. The shops, the restaurants, the cultural organizations, the cobblestone streets, the whole atmosphere of the place, the Whaling Museum, all of that. And so they need to have access to that facility. And they need to come in and have a place to put their vehicle or find another way to get into town that has some level of convenience. They are, after all, on vacation. And so the extra work of driving and driving and driving and the frustration of that is going to hinder the positive nature of the visitor experience. So anything that we can do to promote turnover in parking is a great thing to do. I think we saw the shuttle map up there that from the Old South Road. 2 points on that. I'll make my first one now. If we had the park and ride lot, when we had the park and ride lot for the shuttle service, I took it often because I live out that way and would come in to catch the ferry because that's been my preferred mode of transport even before it got hard to take an airplane. And it was a very popular service. And I also saw, my second point, a lot of people who work downtown parking and taking that service in as well. The problem is most of us are at work before 10 o'clock in the morning. So then if we can find a way to expand that service to bring people into town earlier and have people be able to stay in town later through that satellite parking option, then it's a consideration that we should put on the table. And I would also say that most visitors are used to pay for parking. We do have a paid parking program now. It's called a ticket. But people who come here, and I think this is the only place that I have lived in my lifetime where I have not had to put a quarter or a nickel or a penny even back in the day in a parking meter or pay for a parking pass. When I've worked on university campuses, I paid for the privilege to park on the campus. It strikes me that, yes, it's unique to Nantucket, but it's most of the world expects to pay for parking. And if it allows the visitors to have that quality experience of the island, then it's something that we need to be looking at. And I would say that since I've been in the job, I've been studying what other resort communities do in terms of parking programs. I've had the opportunity to look in depth and have conversations with people in Bar Harbor, Maine. about their parking issues, and they're pretty much in the same place that we are. They have cruise ships instead of ferries, but they also have that kind of traffic that comes into town, needs to be managed, and residents who need to come into town. They also have a national park, and they're working through the struggles. And it's not, and they're doing it baby steps. I mean, they've learned the hard way that they put a program into place, and they had to adjust it within 6 weeks of putting it into place in the first year. So it's not going to be easy, but it is managing some of the stress that residents feel and providing an opportunity for visitors to come in and experience downtown Bar Harbor. And they've done it on a seasonal basis as well. I think that changing behavior is very hard, and that's what paid parking management would be about, is changing our behavior. But it's a necessity. So I would say on the business side, it's a two-pronged question as well. First, there are employees who need to come to work. And I've seen the shuffle that comes with the way the parking is now, that it ends at like 6 o'clock. So if you get in at 5 and you park, you're there all night. And that's what a lot of the employees in the restaurants do. I hear it verbatim, directly from them, that's how they get into town to work at night. A lot of folks live in that Old South Road corridor. Again, another argument for increasing the frequency of that or the extending of that service to provide transportation of employees into town. And our shops depend on people coming to see them. I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with Sam at the Nobby shop, or Alan Bell, or employees at the Looms, that there's no place for people to park to come in to take advantage of a sale or to either purchase or to browse, and they're losing business because they don't have that opportunity. And those are great, fine establishments in our community that serve us as well as our visitors. So I would say that those are my perspectives on parking from my role in culture and tourism.
Well, thank you so much, Janet. Thank you. And next is the administrator for the Nantucket Regional Transit Authority. Introduce to you Paul Leary.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here today. It's nice to be a member of the panel, and it's great to hear the support of expanded shuttle service through the survey, through the student study, and through the potential parking district, and some of the discussions and approvals that the Board of Selectmen have recently had. The NRTA started in 1995, so we're looking to begin our 23rd year. Back in the day, no one thought a shuttle service was needed, and now there's just not enough of it. We have expanded since that initial season where we only operated 2 routes and used 4 buses, and ridership projections were very much exceeded. Over the next 22 years, service was expanded to include more routes in more areas, Sconset, Nantucket, the beaches. More vehicles were utilized. Longer season has been provided with starting in mid-May and running until Columbus Day. Longer hours of operation. We recently, 3 years ago, started running until midnight on the Old South Road route, Mid-Island and Myacomet. And with Remain's efforts, we were able to provide shelters, real-time bus information, an information center that is staffed, and a building that has necessary services that our passengers need, and that is all to encourage more use, make it easier for people to use the bus. So we've made some great strides, and not to say that we have come anywhere close to meeting the unmet service needs, but something like parking management that could pay for these expanded services would be fantastic, and I think make a huge difference to the traffic and parking problems. So I'm going to make a big announcement, and I thought you were going to do it, so I was glad that you did your presentation. And I'm happy to announce that beginning our 23rd year, Daffodil Weekend, we will be providing year-round bus service. This is exciting. It's exciting. It wasn't easy. It was a several-year process, even though the need and demand has existed for many, many years. But we will be providing service year-round on the Mid-Island, Myacomet, and Sconset. Well, we're going to do a version of the Sconset Old South Road in the summer. It will primarily service Old South Road and Nobodere Farm Road with some limited trips to Sconset each day. Once we identified that there was a need and a demand for that service, people wanted it. It's the most frequent comment I have gotten for many, many years is, why don't you run year-round? Once we identified the need and the demand, how is it going to be paid for? And that was a larger, harder discussion. But the Board of Selectmen understood the need for it. We're very supportive of it, and through a combination of increased fares and the town's commitment to fund it, we are able to provide it. So after Columbus Day, you can still take the bus. And I'd like to touch on the park and ride lots, because they are an important component to any public transit system, and you see them all over. With any mass transit operation. We do currently provide park and ride areas at locations that are along the routes. Finding those lots is difficult to have enough spaces. We're fortunate enough to have partnered for many, many, many years with some local business establishments that are allowing us to use their spaces. But it's hard to find that space. So, 2 Fairgrounds Road, when the town was looking and was having issues with overnight parking and commercial vehicles, and that provided that lot to be used for overnight parking, which was fantastic because there's not really any other place on the island that you can park overnight. The NRTA developed private funding relationships to run a ferry connector service. And we did that for a few years. It was very successful. The unfortunate thing was that funding was no longer available. And that happened at the same time that the town decided to expand that lot to the 200 spaces that Mike was referring to, that would have provided an opportunity to promote that lot, the NRTA, to promote that lot as a commuter lot and provide that more direct service with a park and ride lot. So I guess, with the unmet service needs, we have areas of the island that we're not servicing that were identified in our regional transit plan. Tom Nevers, Cisco. I think once we start running year-round, the hours 7 to 9 on weekdays and 7 to 7 on weekends, we're going to find that people want more of that and longer service, longer hours of service. So I think the general theme is funding. We can provide these services. We need to provide these services to have the end benefit of less traffic and more downtown parking opportunities, but how is it funded? So I'm excited that we're taking first steps in a parking district and talking about managed parking to help fund some of the things that are going to help us all navigate and park in downtown. So it's exciting to be on the list. Not always on the list or the right list, but so it's exciting. I'm excited about providing year-round service to the community, and thank you.
Well, thank you, Paula, for that excellent presentation and for allowing us to be among the first to be the recipients of such great news. Thank you. And our final panelist this afternoon will be Vice Chair of the Board of Selectmen, Matt Fee.
Hi, thanks. Thank you, Charlie. I'm going to ramble around a little bit. I was busy in the bakery today. If you haven't bought cookie dough, I'm putting a plug in. The junior class is selling cookie dough, and they're raising money to go to the Galapagos. So if you haven't done it, go to Henry Jr. I think they'll have some extras left over. So I'm going to ramble around a little bit because I was cracking a zillion eggs this morning. A lot of people say we don't have to do anything. It's not broken. It works. But as we saw earlier, it is broken. There's a ton of studies that show that we're way over capacity. A lot of businesses are impacted. And it's been for sort of 20 years till I feel like there's sort of a will now to try to tackle this. I think the Board of Selectmen, showed the will of the people we voted a parking commission, a parking fund, as people have described earlier, and we adopted demand management principles. I think that is the key to this entire situation. It's a philosophical approach where we value parking, and we manage the demand through market signals. We manage the demand through what we charge. And the most desirable locations, you charge more. So if you're parking right straight on Main Street, you might be charged more. You're parking further away, you charge less. If you don't do that, a lot of things, if you don't do that, it's a tragedy of the commons. You have, a free thing, everyone uses it too much. We've talked earlier today about being at 85%, but how do you get to 85% with just a sticker system? You say, I pay $50. That's not going to change. And we're going to have the same rules and the same enforcement. It isn't going to change. The only way we're actually going to change people's, change what they do, change their habits, is by having some sort of incentives or disincentives, which is where the demand management comes in. And the goal is pretty simple. If you have a street, you want to have 1 out of 8 spaces open at any one time. You change the pricing, and it might take a year or two, and it might a while to figure out what the pricing is, but you change the pricing till that happens. And when that happens, a lot of good things happen. There's more turnover downtown. There's people that drive in town and not circling around. If you look at like New York City, 30 in any urban environment, we're probably higher. 30% of the traffic is from people looking for a space to park. If all of a sudden there's a spot on every block, then you've dropped your traffic by 30%. And I would say our traffic here is higher than 30%. So that's the idea behind it. The sticker system, I think, could be a step toward that goal if it includes an RFID sticker and if it gathers the data and we have a plan to lead to demand management principles. If the sticker system ends up being, that's what we did, and we're raising some money, then I think that we've lost our opportunity. We haven't really tackled it the way we need to do it. And we talked about Nelson Nygaard earlier, one of the people there that we talked to, Jason, and I had this feeling in the back of my head, and he said, you're gonna, if you're not careful with the sticker, you're gonna create a sense of entitlement, and people are gonna think that they can come down and park more often. And you're not gonna help yourself, you're actually gonna make it worse. So our 105 will be 110. It's impossible. The Nantucket is it's unique in a lot of ways, but some of the things that people suggest here won't work. We're adding 2.3 cars every dwelling that we build is the number that we tracked a few years ago. The water comment came in the other night and said they did 200 and something hookups. So you add the wells in, that's 300 hookups. That's 500-600 cars a year. Now they're not all, and so we can't look at this and think that we can continue to add that many vehicles and not promote buses and biking and demand management. We're a perfect spot. Things like satellite lots are not, they're too valuable, to have a bunch of cars sitting in them. And the other thing is the island's small enough that once people get in, they're going to drive around and take a chance. So I think as we build out the system over the years, I think the system has to be, you walk out of your car, you walk out of your door of your house, and you can walk down to the corner and there's a bus available. Or you can get on your bike and go down. It just we have to think about it more broadly. And some of the things that work off island are not going to work here because we've got we can't add demand. So I'll talk about that in a minute. And then I've got a couple comments. Parking without the disincentives isn't going to work. If anyone is interested, you look up Brace's paradox. In a lot of places, like in California, they'll add a whole highway, and everyone will think this is great. It fills up the next day, and it actually makes the other roads even worse. And so that's just something to look up. And number 2 on Mike's slide was increasing parking. That's very, very difficult. We don't have the land, we don't have the road services, and people aren't going to use them. So that's why I'm back to demand management. We have to be thinking about that. The idea that stickers are going to encourage turnover, I flatly don't agree. I think they won't. I think it's going to be the other way around. I think it's going to make people think that they can, they get to park there all day like they do now. A lot of what was one of the studies found was a lot of the parking is long-term parking downtown. A good percentage of it is people who park there all day. My employees that work a second job go down and they know which streets to park starting at 2 p.m, so they don't have to move, and so we have to sort of get away from the idea that you can park and roll all day long. There should, I agree with Melissa that there needs to be a charge and you need to charge more. Now, that doesn't mean that everyone that goes down is going to pay a lot of money. If you go down, if we set this up right, the first hour or two could probably be free. We have to get rid of the people that are parking for 6 or 8 hours. And we have to, and we can't just it's not fair to get rid of them and then they have no way to get in and out of town. We need to set up the bus systems and and safe bicycle paths and everything else. That is something that has changed. This year we're spending a lot of money on roundabouts and roads, which are going to help that a little bit. But in the next 5 or 6 years, I thank Mike and PDDC. They're putting as much money into alternatives as they are into the roads, and that was sort of a philosophical change from probably a couple of years ago, which I think is going to make a big difference. Let me see. Our problem isn't just seasonal. Even in the winter, it's difficult to park. In the winter, though, and we should be utilizing these principles. But and I had a business downtown where it's not Kitty's, it's on Oak Street. I had a business down there, and I left that business because in the winter we didn't do any business. It was the police and some of the people that lived next door that worked around us would park there all day, and so we required turnover. I wasn't getting it. The days that there were ticketed and people moved, we'd do $500, $1,000. The days they didn't, we do $200. I gave up and sold it. I think that but the solution is in the winter is different. All people have to do in the wintertime is park in the 2-hour spaces. Think about everybody else. Think of the common good and park in the 2-hour spaces. Those should be free all winter, and then there should be charging in the core to have people not parking. I've gone down to try to go to the bank or try to get some soup. There's nowhere to park. And then I went down the other day and there were spaces, and lo and behold, I walked into the bank and they said, "It really stinks. They're ticketing us now." And I'm like, "Great, they're ticketing you." And different than Janet, when I got a ticket, and when I got my first ticket, a few years ago, I went to the police chief and said, "Thank you very much. You ticketed me. This is what we're supposed to do." But I agree. I'd rather not have tickets. I think we should be doing it with demand management. My final thing, and I'm sure we're going to have a lot of questions. Oh, the other thing, year round. Everyone some of these. I think we got a lot of information from the survey, but you also have to realize, as Charlie sort of mentioned, everyone thinks that the solution is somebody else. I'll do what I'm doing. I'll pay nothing, and I'll do what I'm doing, and someone else will solve it. And it doesn't work that way. We all have to do it. Sort of the parking garage. We'll build a parking garage. We'll charge a lot of money, and the rich people in the summer will park in the garage, and we'll all park on the street in front of our desks for free. It's not going to work like that. You have to be thinking of the common good and thinking of everybody. And then the final thing I'll say before we go to the questions, if you don't know Donald Shoup, that's the guy who wrote this book, The High Price of Free Parking. There's a website, SHOUPDOGG, Shoup Dog. He has a lot of his philosophies and theories there. He started the whole idea of a lot of this, and I find it fascinating. I think it's what we need to be thinking about and adopting, and I think people should go on there and look at it. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Matt, and thanks to all of our presenters who have given us an awful lot to think about. If you have questions, I want to remind you to raise your hand, and we'll get an index card to you. You can jot it down, and we'll read it from here. And the first question is, well, actually, these two are virtually the same. Why do kiosks have to allow unlimited parking? If we retain the time limits, kiosks would probably clear up spaces quicker than stickers. And related question is, well, the same question, why would metered parking preclude time limits? The current enforcement could continue as the time limits as they do in neighborhoods in Boston, such as Back Bay. Who wants to tackle that one?
I don't mind answering that, and I'm sure others can chime in afterwards as well. That's absolutely right. You know, the thing about these kiosks is they're very flexible. You can basically program them to function as with any kind of restriction that you want. If you want to limit 1 hour parking, you want to charge $1 for 1 hour of parking, and then that's as much as you're allowed to purchase through the kiosk. That absolutely can be done. Reality is, I don't think that's how it would be configured. I think what a lot of us have talked about, what Matt talks about, and I believe what's in the Nelson Nygaard study is, if you want to pay $1 for the first hour, it's fine. The second hour, it's going to be twice as much. The hour after that, it's going to be twice as much as that, and so eventually you'll get moved along. It's very flexible. I just think some of us have the means to probably participate in some kind of financial structure that allows us to pay longer term. Some of us not so much. I think the point of the sticker is this: it was a little more equitable for those who needed to use it every single day. The net proceeds were about the same out of both systems, and one required a little bit more overhead and maintenance than the other. So I don't believe either one are wrong. I think the kiosk required a little bit more maintenance, a little bit more financial impact to those who use it every day, and the sticker is a little bit low cost overhead. I mean, it is just a sticker that could be expanded to be a smart sticker and have other equipment, but easier to maintain. It's not that it can't allow restrictions. It's just that I think any type of restriction, if you wanted to pay to stay all day, you could, we could allow that restriction. But again, that's counter to the idea and the policy of creating turnover. I think we all kind of want that flexibility. If I can just put in more, it cost me $1 to give me an extra hour to stay for a 2-hour lunch, allow me that flexibility, and that's the beauty of it. It's not wrong. It's just, one's a little bit more heavy-handed with the turnover than the other.
Comment, if you would, Mike. The way I see it is there's two dimensions to this demand management, and one is the flexibility of the prices depending upon the length of the time that one parks in a space. But there's also a geographical dimension so that you could have increased costs the closer you are to the core district and more reasonable costs further out. Is that
That's correct? Absolutely right. And I think that's how the Nelson Nygaard study was calibrated. If you're in the inner core, next to the post office, there would be a higher rate of fees. There's the outer core, the 2-hour district. If you wanted to pay less, that would, if you're price sensitive, that would force you to park other places. If you didn't want to pay at all, then you would, park outside of that district and bike or walk in. If there's taking a taxi or some kind of other ride for hire option was available and that was less expensive, you're going to take that option. The point is that you make those types of decisions based on the economic environment and what's important to you. Again, just to focus on the sticker and what would the benefit of that for freeing up spaces. If someone's here for a week, I think there would be a heavy decision to make whether you wanted to buy the $50 sticker or if you figure you'll invest that money into Uber rides, taxi rides, Lyft rides, bus passes, which we're going to buy anyway. We're all of us. We'll all have a bus pass. Do you want to buy this other and participate in these other costs? It's meant to have that be a factor in your decision making. Right now, it's really not. It's the time restriction and can you beat the enforcement? Can you escape without getting a sticker? That's really the dynamic that exists now.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Next question. Could the WPI students or others develop a smartphone app that would give real-time information on open parking downtown or in satellite lots? and real-time information about when shuttles arrive at particular locations. People use that kind of things in big cities, and it might help to modify behavior.
I can answer that, Charlie. The simple answer is yes, they could, and the only question is whether it would take them a long weekend or an entire week.
And I'd like to address the other one because we've had a real-time bus system app available for 5-6 years, and it gives the estimated arrival times at stops.
And I would just say how great the little app is. You can actually watch your bus moving towards you on it. So you translock. So you know where the bus is. You know when you're going to run or whether you can amble to get to the stop. It's really fantastic in terms of that real-time information. And I think there are also, I'm not sure even WPI needs to develop it. There are probably a half dozen of those apps out there in the world that could be adapted to here. There are some issues about where do you put the sensors and how do they fit in our curbs and our unmarked parking spaces, and how do you know, you're not looking at space 20, you're looking at somewhere along Center Street there might be a parking space open. So the historic nature of the downtown adds some challenges to some of those where's my open space apps that you find in bigger cities with more structured parking around. Mm-hmm. But it's all good. I think the key to the parking demand management really is that if you park just enough away, it would be free. It's not that you have to pay to park in the downtown or to utilize downtown. I just think that's really important. The geographic thing that you noted is that it's really sensitive to where.
Anyone else care to comment? Okay, next question. How many of the in-town parking spaces are used by individuals working in town? If employers required their staff to park outside of town, would we not have enough parking spaces to meet demand?
I don't know what the number is on how many employees actually have a demand for on-street parking. I think it basically gets down to what we had talked about initially if in the core area, the inner core. Do you want employees to park in the inner core? No. Do you want to have that parking available for short-term parking? Those of us who want to use downtown for an hour, 30 minutes, 15 minutes, run a quick errand, get a quick bite. That's what the inner core, the core area is intended to. There are other options for longer-term parking. There's the town lot, which is a little undersized. There absolutely is potential for other capacity options for longer-term parking, that being the garage and park and ride areas. So there are options for employees closer to town, in good vicinity to town, and outside if you wanted to participate in a park and ride system. So I think it comes down to just better communicating that to the employees and making it as convenient as possible. And, if a lot of these employees are here for the summer, if they have 1 hour frequency, then that's probably not all convenient. If they have 20-minute frequency like the NRTA is striving for, it's very attractive and you can actually get to work on time. But again, the pricing and the time restrictions will always push the employees out further. And it's just our job to kind of better communicate that and create affordable options for that long-term opportunity.
Paula, do you have any sense as to how many employers provide bus passes for their employees?
Yeah, we have between every year, I'm going to say on average, 70 businesses that buy passes for their employees, and that can range from one pass to 200 plus passes. So we have a commuter program that enables businesses to buy passes for their employees at a reduced rate. They can take it as a tax write-off as an employee benefit now. So we sell 500 of those passes every year.
Oh.
Matt? I'll chime in. I'm up early, 3, 4 in the morning, going to work, and there are no cars parked anywhere downtown. There are no cars on Cliff Road. There are no cars in the core district. The entire downtown is empty. You hit 7 or 8 o'clock, and the downtown is full, and it's in the 2 hour spaces all the way out to the hinterlands are full. We just had to put more enforced parking all the way up to the oldest house because people were pulling up and parking there all day long. So again, and so the first question was asked was how many how much of his employee parking. If it's 1,000 spaces, I'm guessing it's at least 500, if not 700 of those are employees that are parking all day, moving their cars, coming downtown. So that it's a huge problem that we have to like sort of not think it's going to solve itself, without some disincentives and things. I just say, and so anyway, that's.
And I would just like to add, that was one of the reasons that the town was supportive of the NRTA extending its hours of service until midnight on the main commuting routes. It's hard for people to want to take the bus if you can only get them there. They want to be able to get back. And the restaurant workers and the second shift workers, we were missing that by ending our service at 11:30. We haven't captured all the late night employees, but I think we've captured quite a few of those. And whether it's a successful service, that extra half hour or so of service that we're providing.
Charlie, could I follow up with a question to Paula? I'm just curious to know to what extent it's, and this is sort of a question of administratively and logistically, to what extent you are able to scale up as demand materializes and someone who wants to pay for it materializes. For example, you talked about the permits and hundreds of employers buying the permits. Does that constitute a fairly significant proportion of the total revenue, such that you could say, gee, we found a well that's got some money here, there's a demand, there are people who need to get downtown. If we could scale that up by 50% next year and try it out, we might meet 90% of the demand instead of 50% of it. And do you have the flexibility to sort of pick up the signals and then adapt to it, or do you have to go out and buy more buses?
It would depend on what it was. Like if we're talking about servicing new areas that would require additional equipment, what we're doing now, the expanded hours of service, the year-round service does not require any of that. I have a little bit of flexibility, and next year at this time, I may be able to answer your other question with the fare increase and the pass increases to see where we're going to fall from a revenue stream and what amount of service that will cover.
You're buying, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Just because an employer buys a pass doesn't guarantee the employee is using the bus. Some of the planning board decisions require you to buy the pass, but the employees don't use it. If they were getting charged $20 or $30 a day because they're parking for 8 hours, they might use it, or they'd find another way. And we might have more money if we were charging. We'd have more money to run the buses till 2 or 3 in the morning. So it's all kind of tied together. The bus doesn't work for my employees because it would be 2 stops. They'd have to go. It starts too late in the morning for some of them,
Transfers.
and then it's 2 stops to get there, and it's just quicker for them to bike the 2 miles, or walk the 2 miles to work, 3 miles to work. So I think we have to be aware of those situations as well.
Melissa?
Yeah, just a couple of comments. One is I would really love for a future WPI, the study and the surveys that were done this winter were great. I don't believe they really focused on businesses and employee usage. The survey went out to residents. They talked to a lot of stakeholders, but not really to business owners or to the people who work every day in the downtown. And I think there is work to be done to understand the employee mentality and the business mentality in the downtown. Because I think pretending whether you're an office worker or a restaurant worker or you work at the steamship, you all have different perspectives. And what someone said earlier about you have to really change people's behavior, and that's hard to do. The park and roll mentality for people who work in town, and I've worked in town for 30 plus years, luckily I can walk to work, but the park and roll mentality is really inbred in the culture of the downtown employee, where you think you're entitled to go out every hour to move your car 5 feet. That's what you do, because then your chalk mark is gone. And so the whole concept of enforcement, the way we currently do it, misses the downtown employee who parks and rolls. In fact, as you start to enforce further out, it drives the employees closer in because they need to be able to be gone for a minimal amount of time to turn their car and park their car and move their car. So the people I know who were parking out at the oldest house, when they start enforcing out there, they're going to move not further away. They're going to move closer in because now they have to get out every 2 hours to move their car. So I think the system is truly broken as to the downtown employee. And I think there's ways to make it better for every employer to not have, I got to go, I'm going to go be gone for 15, 20 minutes because I'm moving my car. That's a tremendous disruption in the place of employment. So I think there's real ways to, I'm not sure I know exactly what they are, but I think there's ways we need to study that more and we need to understand that more and we need to do a better job of changing people's behavior down there.
I'll give you a quick example. I have a parking lot, if you know something natural, probably owns 20, 25 cars. If I if I'm not there, I'm not paying attention, if I allowed my employees, they would fill the entire parking lot up.
Right.
And I would be out of business and they'd be out of jobs.
Right.
That's actually what's happening downtown. So I've got this little microcosm. That is what's happening downtown. These people are parking and they're slitting the throats of the businesses they work for. And they don't even know it. And so I just think that's and some of the business owners are are some of the worst offenders. We changed it when I was the first selectman 15 years ago, and we enforced more rigidly for one season. All of a sudden, people were paying somewhere between $3,000 and $10,000 to have a parking space because they didn't want to get ticketed. And it was at the Dreamland, and it was at the where NRTA is now.
Yeah.
They were paying a lot of money. That tells you the value of the space is $3,000 to $10,000. And that was back 15, 20 years
Right.
ago.
I remember.
So
Yeah.
we have to value. This is a valuable property that we as a community need to have everybody have a chance to do it. The other thing only point I wanted to make, there's a talk of it's not fair, it needs to be cheap. The poor people can't do it. The poor people don't own cars. The poor people are on mopeds, they're on the bus. They cannot afford to have a car payment and pay for gas and insurance on the island, everything else. So really what's happening, but they're subsidizing it. They're paying through their taxes and their rent and everything else. So right now it's not fair. They're subsidizing us. If we really, truly, care about the poor people, then we would actually pay and we charge for the right price for parking on the street. And it's sort of a shift of, how we have to think about it. But that's one of the biggest things that happened a few years ago. Oh, the poor people, we can't do that. We're sticking them with the bill now. So we really have to think about it differently.
Okay, who wants to explain how the parking management plan would work?
Which one?
I'm not sure I fully understand the question because, quite honestly, we've narrowed this down to two options, essentially. It's implement a sticker program or implement kiosks downtown or some kind of other way to pay hourly. So I think the last slide I showed was project management principles that, you have to understand, who owns it and the schedule and the budget and all of that, having measures of success. So that's the implementation part of it. If you want any more detail beyond that, when would the stickers go on sale and what districts would they apply to? Well, if that's what you're referring to, I can talk about that. If it's the kiosk, obviously there's procurement of machines that has to take place, installation, where do these machines go? What is the pricing structure for the machines? I think the work that Nelson Nygaard did helped figure a lot of that out, the pricing structure and whatnot. But again, first we need the approval of Article 66 for the Parking Benefit District. We need to establish who's going to actually own this problem, and then have the dedicated funds, and then come out with a rollout package of actually when do these regulations start? When do you have to have a sticker by? We actually do know that. It's essentially the same as the beach sticker times here. It's essentially Memorial Day weekend through Labor Day weekend. And probably the pricing for the kiosks would mirror that same kind of pricing structure potentially. I think I would need more detail on the question to go even further with that.
We don't have any more detail,
Sure.
but am I correct in that the Nygaard study, which outlines exactly how demand management pricing would work, is on the Remain Nantucket website?
It is.
It's on the town
also on
website
the
as well.
town
Town
website.
website.
But again, to remind, I think the Nelson Nygaard study was done in 2010, maybe 2011. And I know I've had a conversation with Peter. The technology that you can use has changed radically and really evolved since then. So I don't think, as much as nobody wants another study, I'm not the WPI kids were starting to look at newest technologies and newest things. So I think there's other developments that we would want to take advantage of. We don't want to be 10 years behind in whatever we adopt. So to me, I think it's a really to be determined kind of thing. The best thing about the way Mike's approaching this is we get the parking benefit district in place, you get a commission really charged with owning the issue, and we continue to try to implement it in steps. You take the step that we can take, we recognize the problem. Again, I don't know how any of this fits with ferry parking and people trying to get over that's the problem downtown now during the winter. And so how do you address the fact that, 400 people are on the boat in the morning taking their kids to hockey games in January, and then you can't park downtown all day on a Saturday? Again, how does that fit with the businesses? So I think it's an incremental problem with a lot of different things, and I think a parking management system's got to be rolled out slowly. Like Janet said, you fix it a bit at a time, and then what doesn't work, you change.
If I can just add a footnote to Melissa's comment, there really is a fortuitous alignment between this taking the baby steps and incremental change, and the fact that we can every year, I can go back and propose the next WPI study to say, this is where we're at. We took the first baby step, and now we want to think about the next baby step that might be on the horizon 2 years from now, and that's what we want you to focus on. And the important thing to understand is that the technology now that's available and that's actually in use, that's kind of routinely used in big cities, is so far beyond what it was 5 or 6 years ago that it just is astonishing. And when you start to think ahead another 5 years to what it's going to be, that we can only have a glimmer of what it might be like, we need to understand that any infrastructure we pay for, such as a garage, you need to think about what a garage is going to be 10 or 12 years from now. That might not be a place where you park your car. That may be the equivalent of the holding area at an airport for Uber cars or taxis, because everybody coming off that ferry says, I need to get from here to there. I'm either going to go get my car and get in it and drive there, or I'm going to wait for a taxi, or I'm going to stand somewhere for an Uber car, or I'm going to hope there's a NERTA bus connector. But that garage may not at all be where any of us parks. It may be just a holding area. The technology is so far ahead of where we are, and yet we don't want to make one decision. We want to find our way to a solution where things get better every year. And I think that really fits well with the luck that we have with Worcester Polytech, that every year 4 more students come back and they say, we want to sink our teeth into a problem. What are you worrying about this year?
And if I can just add one thing, that's the reason I really, really want us to have smart stickers. So I'll just say that. I want us to have smart stickers because you can't do that iterative work if you don't collect the data to know what you're dealing with.
You're absolutely right.
And so I just think that for us we need to jump in on the data collection in a real-time kind of way. And the smart sticker is a huge advance over any of the other kinds of ways of collecting information. So
No, I agree 100%. The selectmen, at our agenda meeting the other day, we were discussing, because staff had talked about some of this, and we discussed it. And if we look at it as just kiosks or smart sticker, we've created a false dilemma. There are other options. So we have to, and so one of our suggestions is maybe to have Jason come down, or someone, if Remain will help us, and come down and sort of, talk to staff and say, here are the other ways we can do this. The other part we haven't talked about is the whole issue of the residents that are in the 2-hour zones. The more we push this, the more we make their life miserable, because they can't even park near their house anymore. And so one of the largest stakeholders that has to be considered in all this is, how do we find a fair system for residents to be parked somewhere near their house and not just push the problem to them? It's not just the inner core, it's the entire system, including the garages and if we have one, in the parking lots. How do we put everybody into it? And we need expertise for it. We don't know that.
If I could, I'll just follow up on the other. I think we've narrowed this down to 2 pricing mechanisms, and that's really what all this comes down to: is you want a user fee or unit pricing. I don't disagree at all that kiosks aren't the only option that exists. You can pay by phone in a lot of communities. In some communities, it's exclusively pay by phone. Is that convenient? I don't know. Are there in-car meters that exist? There absolutely are. Peter talked on another, so the technology is definitely out there, but do you want to pay by unit pricing? That's really the question it comes down to. The other part, what Peter talked about, you're not wrong at all. I mean, ride sharing is absolutely a parking solution. It reduces demand for a parking space. It's not our vehicle that's being parked somewhere. It's what service we subscribe to that got us there. And a taxi might be out doing another ride, or an Uber driver might be out picking another ride. That's not a demand on an on-street parking space. But the utility for, say, a garage, you're absolutely right with that. 800-900 people exit downtown in the summertime at any given moment. If we have this huge shift in how we all drive, we don't drive our vehicles, we subscribe to a service that transports us. Say we get about a half of those rides covered by ride sharing, and the rest of us just drive alone. You're going to need, something like 300-400 vehicles staged downtown. That's pretty much the utility for a garage to be right there for on demand. As those people are getting off the boats, they subscribe to a service. As those people are leaving restaurants, their vehicles pick them up real time. The other half of the population can take the bus, drive their own car, walk, bike, carpool. But it's really important to understand that technology is changing at light speed. But that doesn't mean that we don't necessarily have to accommodate vehicles at all. And that the way we pay, it doesn't mean that we won't pay. It's how we pay will probably change.
Just to put a footnote on that, is there anybody who can comment on what I understand to have been the considerable success of the valet parking, which is a form of don't use your car, count on a service? I know I've heard that valet parking was very successful, or has proven very successful thus far. And I don't know if anybody can talk about it specifically, or what might lie ahead in the next year or two as it finds its way into meeting the demand that's out there.
No, I think it's definitely supplemental supply. I showed you the parking deficiency numbers. That was pre-valet parking. Once valet was instituted, something like 80 spaces were available in valet. Others, if the cars were taking out, that helps reduce your parking demand. Absolutely. Where it stands this summer, I don't think anyone really knows. There's been other uses or other demands for the areas that are used for lots. That doesn't mean that it's not a demand for valet. It absolutely was a great tool. I think since that was instituted, you see it at the hospital now. You see it at restaurants now. So I think it's a very attractive tool that just demonstrates that people are willing to pay for that convenience.
Yeah, the problem we're having right now with valet, especially if we lose the electric company lot, is where's a close enough place to valet the cars to? And that goes back to, again, the Nantucket issue. And the same thing, say we had 400 cars that could drive all over the place. What roads are they driving down? And how are they going to, if it drops traffic, that'll work. But if it's the same traffic and we're just adding more of these buzzing around, some of this is a finite amount of space. There's a finite number of roads, and they're finite widths. So we really, we did the comp plan 20 years ago, and we had a guy here who put everything on the computer even back then, and we had the little white dots, and they all moved around. And we said, what happens when we get to so many vehicles? And he showed us, and he said, oh, yeah, you're going to fail on Old South, and you're going to be backed up an hour and a half here and an hour there. And the response from most of us was, that'll never happen. This is Nantucket. That's not Nantucket. Nothing to worry about here. And we looked at last year, and it was exactly what this guy said, probably 5 years quicker. So we have to sort of think about it and actually, think about how we're going to do it. The projections are real. It actually, when you add that many vehicles onto these roads, it actually does happen like that. The
gridlock.
Yeah, the gridlock does. And then we all hate it, and we're getting ready to spend how many millions of dollars to quote unquote fix it, but I'm not sure it'll fix it, because they're just going to be running right into the next corners, the next block. So I really think we have to rethink how we do it. Mike and I have these conversations all the time.
Part of what Matt just said echoes a comment that a discussion of parking without a simultaneous discussion of traffic is 100% certain to be a failure. Anything that does no more than attempt to increase parking spaces / availability will inevitably grossly increase traffic downtown, and increased traffic will increase the demand for parking. Here's a quick question. Could there be a discount on the cost of a sticker for seniors and handicapped vehicles or a cheaper hourly rate?
I showed you some of the general laws. That statute's pretty long. If you really want to read it, you can read it. But it does have provisions in there for handicap or disabled parking, accessible parking spaces, and I believe there's language in there for veterans actually. The disabled spaces now are exempt from the time restrictions, so they're already accommodated. So if those spaces were still used, I don't believe that you would have to require a sticker for those particular spaces. I believe that's in the statute to accommodate not only veterans, but those with disability.
Okay, next question. Besides improving bus service, how do we encourage people to take the bus instead of driving into town?
Drive into town once and try to park. We're doing everything that we can to encourage people. We have frequent service. We have various riderships and incentive programs. The commuter business program is one. We have the emergency ride home program because people would say, oh, I've got to drive my car. What if I have an emergency? So there's an emergency ride home program through Mass Rides at DOT that will reimburse you for whatever other mode of transportation you need. If you have an emergency, if you have a sick child, they'll reimburse you for your taxi ride to pick up your child, to take them to the hospital, to go get their prescription. We participate in the New Ride program, which allows you to log your non-car driven trips, and you get reward points that you can redeem to different businesses that participate through that. What else do I do? I seem like I do a lot. The real-time bus. The real-time bus is a huge. We saw people. Actually, I'd be sitting on my bench, and people that didn't even take the bus would come and flash it and have it on their phones and say, now I take the bus. So I think that we saw an increase. So we try to do, everything we can. We have the park and ride lots on the existing routes for those that, don't live up near a bus. They can drive and park and then take the bus into town. So we're doing a lot of things already. And we always look for ways. We started doing shelters with Remain, and so that the more used stops had covered areas for people to wait. And we're looking at expanding some of the shelters to other locations. So,
Thank you.
I would add that the efforts by the DPW, and there's a public hearing on this on the 22nd about improving sidewalks too, because the other alternative to taking a bus, if you're 20 minutes away, is to walk into town. Sometimes when I park at the Chicken Box and see where the bus is on my app, I realize I'm going to get to town before the bus gets here, so I just walk into town.
you must be fast.
Yeah.
I dream of the day when the buses are free. I dream of the day when we are earning enough money through some of these other systems that the buses are free. And the visitors that come here just say, hey, it's like going to Aspen or Vail, where you just say, hey, I'm coming in Nantucket. We don't need a car. We get on the bus, and my family goes everywhere. It's free and it's safe. I think that would be my 20-year out, 15-year out goal.
Make it 5 years out.
Has the Nantucket Historical Commission, not the HDC, the commission, been consulted about any of these proposed changes to the downtown? And if not, why not?
I'll answer that. I don't think they've been consulted. I don't think the Historical Commission, not the HDC, but the other one, has met often recently. And I don't think any of the suggestions are going to be that intrusive. I think what we really will end up with is something that's seamless and looks like what it does already.
Okay. In the first portion of the talk relating to parking deficit, it was not clear how the deficit differs from summer to winter. Could you explain more about that? And the same questioner, are there different solutions for summer and winter? I am glad for possible NERDA expansion into the winter, but I wonder if there may be additional targeted solutions for the summer.
I can take the first part of that. I mean, this. I didn't want to get overly complicated with this. We do go out and actually physically count cars. We don't have the technology right now to tell us how many cars are downtown at any given time, what the utilization is real time. So basically, we go out with a team of interns during the summer months, primarily in August, and just physically take a piece of paper and just write down how many cars we see along a different segment. Take it back to the office, count it up, put it up on a spreadsheet, map it, and then we get our numbers. This is reflective of data, again, from 2010 and in August. So that this is our deficit at peak. But I tell you what, there's been some comments here made about parking utilization in the wintertime. I think we feel that stress now. And I don't know if that was really the case 10 years ago or 15 years ago when I first got here. It was definitely a seasonal issue. I feel it now year round, and I don't know if that's just me being weird, but I think it does exist. And quite honestly, I haven't gone out in February to count up the utilization of cars in the 2-hour in the core district in February. After trying to find a space yesterday and then yesterday evening, I like to shop downtown. I go to the Grand Union downtown. That's just what I do. There was one parking space in the parking lot there at the grocery store. I assume everybody's using it for other things, the boat, other things. But we have a stressed supply year round now. And sure, there's waves of period when everybody leaves the island during vacation, school vacation week. It's not a hard time to find a parking space. But I think you search for those holidays. Right. When everybody leaves to do other things, that it's not an issue. All the other times, I think we have an issue. It's very, very year round, not necessarily seasonal, not necessarily, it goes, I think, even beyond the shoulder season now.
And I would just add to that to say that when the High Line was canceled for a couple of days, that parking lot was empty all day long. And the day the High Line started running again, that parking lot you could not park in, and you cruised around and around and around, and you did not get a space. And there wasn't parking on Commercial Wharf, and there wasn't parking in any of those other areas down there. It is a January, February, March problem. Maybe not 1 week in February, but.
Well, the other point on that, well, just go on. I'll get it in a minute. I'll get it next time.
Okay, a comment. Cities of my childhood, Stuttgart, Heidelberg, Copenhagen, etc., have abandoned downtown parking and traffic. Business has mushroomed. Augmentation of NERDA and satellite parking could decrease traffic and increase business. Anybody care to comment?
You know what? Again, getting to Peter's comment and what I believe, in 10 years when we have these new services that are available and we start looking at, a price of a permit or the price of paying per hour versus the price to actually use your phone and order something to come by and pick you up and take you downtown. Once we reduce that demand and we have staging somewhere else, we can start looking at removing on-street parking on some of the streets and actually open those up, have them be open streets, open for pedestrians, and not necessarily need them for circulation, not necessarily use them for parking, because the demand has been displaced. We all use some service that we just don't have the demand anymore. Are we there yet? No, I don't think we are. But I think there's definitely opportunities, maybe for sections of Main Street, maybe sections where people are parking on sidewalks and the sidewalk isn't used anymore. We can get the cars off of there. There's Cambridge Street that's used for the farmers market in the summertime. That's just on like a Sunday, I believe. That could be something that's summer long because there's no demand for those spaces. So we're going to get there eventually. I think some of these management strategies may discourage it, but I think it really has to be more of a paradigm on how we actually get downtown. We'll either take the bus or subscribe to another service that'll bring us there and have that car not even be in the supply question. And we can start opening up some of these streets and do exactly what they're saying. I mean, I go to these places too. That's Paris, Netherlands, UK. They all have open streets and pedestrian malls, and I think we're going to get there eventually. If not through some of these other developments that are coming down, like Harbor Place, but other places actually in downtown, like Cambridge Street, Main Street, and some of the others.
Well, I'll answer that from a slightly different perspective, but I agree 100%. Again, back to the comp plan days, the same guy who put all his little cars on the streets and drove them all around, I said, well, what if we don't do anything? And what his answer was, it sort of leads to what we're saying. He says, first you'll close Federal Street, then you'll close Main Street, then you'll close another street. You won't have any traffic flow. Then what you'll have to do is you'll have to take an inbound and an outbound street just for taxis and buses. And then your traffic everywhere else will get like a billion times worse. And so if we don't do anything, if we don't adopt some of these principles and do the right thing, then we will end up with closed streets, and we'll end up with the rest of the island just gridlock traffic all day long. And that is not, that's not what we want to, that's not the island we want to be. That's not how we want to handle it, And so it's sort of, sometimes they're closing them and it ends up being a good thing, but sometimes they're closing them because they didn't do anything to limit it. They didn't limit the cars. They didn't, charge for anything. And they ended up in this situation where they had no choice but to close them. And I think that would be a shame,
Melissa?
And just another thing, I like to think about downtown or talk about downtown a little bit as our only deep water port. We are an island. We depend on traffic, boat traffic, to bring our essential services. The trucks come through there, we go through there, whether we come with our car or we don't. A certain amount of traffic and parking has to reside in the downtown. We can't move it someplace else. It is our only deep water port. We need to think about the downtown not just as a beautiful touristy place for the summer people to go and have restaurant experiences. It is how we get our goods and services to and from the island. So and many cities don't have to cope with that. You don't have to have your business district also be your transportation hub. And so I think that's something very unique to the downtown and something that we tend to forget. We tend to not worry about how people come and go on the ferries.
Okay, if anyone has any further questions, please raise your hand and we'll get you an index card. We're down to our final question. If Matt's comment on keeping his lot free of employees is correct, why don't the business owners downtown do the same?
I'll answer that. It's because all of them won't do it. Why should I do it when the other person isn't doing it? And I think it's sort of that, it's people have self-interest. And so, if they force it won't do any good. If they force their employees to park out of town, but no one else is doing that, well, then why should I bother? So they give up. When we did tighten the rules, what happened is some of the managers from these restaurants came and complained and said, "Oh boy, this is our customers. Our customers are so upset." And I talked to the managers, and it was like their employees and themselves that were upset. And the owner, who wasn't even here, was the one that whose business was suffering, didn't even know any of this was happening. So it really is. You have to solve the downtown parking for the employees. We have to find a way where they can bus in and do it, and that would go a long way to straightening it out.
Yeah.
The other thing I forgot to say is people shouldn't be scared of demand management. It's basically a philosophy where it's flexible. You're not necessarily, it's not just a set thing. One street might be more expensive in one area, but the others would be less, and you change it. That's why you need to have a committee that looks at it, and they change it based on what they're seeing in real time. And they don't have to go, if we do it with RFIDs or something, they don't have to go out and count them every day and have with a piece of paper. It's embedded in the technology, and I think so that's what we need to get to, and I think it would do wonders.
So it's a dynamic system so that parking on Federal Street at 6 p.m. on a Friday night would be more expensive than parking on Federal Street at 7 a.m. on a Monday morning.
You could make it as flexible as you want. Exactly.
And people have talked about the churches in the downtown, which are really the lifeblood of keeping downtown vibrant for everyone who lives on this island, and making sure that whatever we do for demand managed parking, we have made it possible for people to come to church and be at church and stay at church when they need to. And again, that's when I worry about the simple sticker program. I don't want to see those congregations feel that they're not welcome in the downtown for some reason. Instead, I want to be able to say there's unit pricing that, yes, parking right in front of St. Mary's on certain times of a weekday may be more expensive, but on Sunday mornings or Saturday evenings, there's a time period there where it is absolutely free. And I think that's why a really flexible system is what we need.
Any final words from any of our panelists? Peter?
I'll just put in one little pitch to follow up on what Melissa's saying. I'm always thinking about 5 or 10 years into the future, and it's really important to understand that we're dealing with the baby step here, and we're trying to get to a point where we can incorporate the technology that will allow us to do the dynamic demand management. And the beauty of that is that once you get there, you can do pilot tests over a period of a month or a season or a year, and you can figure out very quickly what kind of a schedule of tweaking of prices can accomplish what. You don't have to wait a decade, and you don't have to build anything. All you have to do is reprogram it. And so it's really critical to see this, to see what we're talking about right now as a way to sort of usher in a future where we might transition next to the RFID or some kind of electronic system that affords us the ability to try things out, collect data dynamically, and say, we found a way to tweak this along with something else, along with the ride sharing that seems to be materializing in the marketplace. And suddenly it leads to the kind of solution that we say, that's where we really want to go. And we can learn a lot in a very brief period, whereas now it takes us a decade to figure out what to do. So that's kind of the closing thought. And that's why I think it's important to take the first step, because we know it's going to lead to a second step.
Well, please, folks, join me in thanking our wonderful panelists for a great presentation. And thank you all for joining us.